Moria, something about, yes, it's
The
the
air,
passage to the right. But I'm
the,
not
the air,
sure.
is- the air
What
smells
is
so foul right
Radagast?
here.
That's
Oh, boy. Uh,
I don't know.
yeah, and of course, we have to get back to the books, right? Where there's very little given to us about Radagast or the two blue wizards.
yeah.
Although, we say
But
one
I'm
is
not
sight
sure.
unseen, maybe. I don't know.
Well, the only thing we know about the Blue Wizards is they went east and never came back. So
That's right.
Right.
They
I,
were.
I thought it was interesting that the part about communists because this was 1957.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and
McCarthy era
yeah, well, I mean,
and Cold War.
yeah, the Cold War, there were communists, and at different times, the U.S. government was kind of, they were in there, they were embedded. So uh, it was very popular then. It started in the 30s during the Great Depression, I think, mostly. And anyway, it was something that the West was facing off with the Soviet Union. And
Mm-hmm.
I was a kid then. I was like 57. I was 10 years old. And I still remember, and McCarthy was from my home state. And I know my mother hated him, but um, it was a fact of life, and they were a threat. They really were.
Sure. A lot of people suffered under communism. Yeah.
Yeah, just ask what was the guy that was killed with an axe in Mexico? Um,
Mm.
he's a biggie.
Oh, Leon Trotsky.
Trotsky. Yeah, just ask Trotsky.
Yeah. There's not a lot of room for differences of opinion there.
Yes, Stalin reached out, and it went through the American Communist Party, where I think, were the ones that hired his assassin. So anyway, interesting times. Interesting times.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess this Herbert Shiro had written to Tolkien, and so he was suggesting maybe that is this the secret? Is this the Da Vinci Code to your work? Wanting to know, and so yeah, Tolkien unsurprisingly says there is no symbolism. That's really interesting, and I want to credit Hawk for helping me with this, just pointing right away to that use of the word that this is not even something that others have come up with, but it's Tolkien himself who says, yes, applicability, no allegory. So in that sense, he says no symbolism, which is kind of that's a very absolute statement. No symbolism at all in my stories. I mean, that I think we all, to one degree or another, would be like, oh, well, that reminds me of, right? But that's different than symbolism, which is
then overtly, saying this represents that is different than, oh, this brings to mind. Again, he's just trying to tell a story in the epic style of telling a story for the enjoyment of the story and the world and all of that, the setting, the language.
So would we say that allegory is more linked to an author, like symbolism would be more like, did the author intend that?
Yeah, willfully.
Ability is what we as a reader come to it with?
Yeah, willful symbolism for a specific purpose, as opposed to, again, applicability, and that's why his books are more timeless versus, interestingly, Michael Moorcock and the others who are critical of him, who put in specific political and other allegories that are less timeless because they're specific to the time, and the meaning becomes lost in the dust of history, except for, archivists and scholars. And so a lot of these other books that intentionally, it's like a lot of comedy bits that, sketch comedy that are very political or topical. Those are not the timeless ones, right? Those are not the ones that survive generations and decades.
Right.
When they're that targeted, as opposed to more universalisms and applicability of the human experience.
Okay. Second paragraph. Any comments that people wanted to share about what he's referring to here? And since I have not made the struggle wholly unequivocal, and then he refers to flaws in hobbits, elves, dwarves, kings of men, and wizards. and what is the tale really about?
Well, the desire for deathlessness, that's very interesting. Of course, you do get that sense when Bilbo and Frodo get to go off into the Undying Lands, and poor Sam gets left behind because he's got a family to raise still.
Yes, yes, he does.
Yeah, but you can't just say that without, the tale's not really about power and dominion.
You disagree with the professor?
It's timeless. I mean, it's timeless, good and evil, and that's one of the things that attracts people to it.
Okay.
Which was kind of against the grain back in the day because we had the beginnings of the postmodern era, and some of the, what do you call it, where it's your concept. There's no objective truth type deal, and this is objective truth, and human nature also doesn't change. The Nazis, the communists wanted to produce a new man. They utterly failed. So you get the same thing.
Anthony, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the theme of death and the desire for deathlessness is really echoed, I think, in the story of the fall of Numenor, because as time went on, the kings of Numenor gradually wanted to try to, avoid death or cheat death, and it got to the point where, Ar-Pharazôn, the last king of Numenor, wanted to set sail for the Undying Lands and break sort of the ban of the Valar. And consequently, Iluvatar decided to just tear the island asunder. So I guess maybe it goes to show that Tolkien was really thinking about man's limitations, and when he was talking about how the theme of his books, is death.
Right. Hawk, should we have a quick 2 or 3 minute break, or are we good to press on till the end here? Yeah. Okay, when we come back from this, let's go right into the next letter. And interestingly enough, Tolkien talks about Sweden.
So what a quinky dink.
Yeah, so I guess we'll have Hawk's Nifty on YouTube. There will be a little coming back soon. So if you are watching online, please do stay here, and we'll have a really interesting discussion on Tolkien's letter 204.
You hungry? Yeah. Revolution.
I just read a book about this.
Yeah,
That's so cool. I didn't realize.
yeah, they met there probably in some back room. But well,
You wonder if
Yes.
Tolkien had actually ever seen an inn or a pub in England that was called the Green Dragon.
I have no idea. I've never been to England, and
Mm-hmm.
to me, it would be a great name for a pub.
It would be. I was always fascinated by how different pubs chose their names.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Saracen's Head. It's
Wow.
a little there's two odd names. One is the Saracen's Head, and then the other pub name I've seen before is will have something referring to King Charles I, who of course was executed, the only king of Britain to be killed by order of Parliament. And so you'll sometimes see a pub called King's Head. It's just kind of.
Well, where did the Inklings meet? It was weird. It was like the child and something.
The eagle and child, also known as the bird and the baby.
Yeah, that was one of them. That was the main one that they met at, and then they met at two other pubs. The Eagle and Child was a big one, and then there was one called the Crown and something else. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Are we all back and ready to read? Okay. Well, I suggest we take turns now. Thank you, Gary, for reading 203. 204 is a little longer, so I'm just going to read a paragraph, and then I'll pass it off, and the next person that wants to can carry on. Letter 204 from a letter to Rainer Unwin on the 7th of December, 1957. Lord Halsbury, C number 174, was invited by Tolkien to read several parts of the Silmarillion in manuscript during the latter part of 1957. Ooh, that would have been fun to be one of the early readers. In December, Rainer Unwin visited Tolkien to discuss that book and borrow portions of it, and to bring information about the Swedish translation of The Lord of the Rings. As soon as you'd gone, I found Halsbury's letter in full view, though his commentary and criticism, I have now received another 14 pages, is very interesting to me, and in some points useful. The covering letter is chiefly of interest as an indication that, surprising as it may seem, this Silmarillion stuff would have at least some audience. He saw what I handed to you. He wrote, "Thank you for the privilege of seeing this wonderful mythology. I have never read anything like it and can hardly wait for its publication. You must get it published while your sales of The Lord of the Rings are still actively developing. I can quite see that there is a struggle ahead to remold it into the requisite form for publication, and wish you luck." Any comments on that paragraph? Anthony?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't going to give a comment. I was just going to volunteer to read the next portion.
Yep. Okay, you're the next reader. Anything anybody wants to say about that first part? It's kind of a nice testimonial, isn't it? A British lord reads your stuff and says, "Great stuff, wonderful mythology."
Yeah, he said it basically. The time is right.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
time is right to get it out there.
This is a very interesting kind of concept of dealing with it. And remember, everybody, that Rainer Unwin was the son of the publisher, who now is the adult in charge, but he was the one who read the Hobbit back in 1937 or whatever. And
Yes, Sir Stanley Unwin.
that's right, as son of the older Unwin. he said, "This is great stuff, Dad," and so his dad published it. So Rayner now is an adult. All right, Anthony.
Okay. I now see quite clearly that I must, as a necessary preliminary to remolding, get copies made of all copyable material, and I shall put that in hand as soon as possible. But I think the best way of dealing with this at this stage, in which much of the stuff is in irreplaceable sold copies, is to install a typist in my room in college, and not let any material out of my keeping until it is multiplied. I hope that perhaps then your interest will be sufficient for you to want at least a sketch of the remaining part. Sweden. The enclosure that you brought from Almquist, etc. There's a footnote here which says Almquist and Viskel Forlag, one of Tolkien's Swedish publishers, was both puzzling and irritating. A letter in Swedish from sorry for mispronouncing this, but Eka Olmarks, and the footnote says the translator of the Swedish edition of The Lord of the Rings. And a huge list, 9 pages foolscap of names in the j.r.r, which he had altered. I hope that my inadequate knowledge of Swedish, no better than my knowledge of Dutch, but I possess a very much better Dutch dictionary, tends to exaggerate the impression I received. The impression remains, nonetheless, that Dr. Olmarks is a conceited person, less competent than charming Max Chart, who was the translator of the Dutch edition, though he thinks much better of himself. In the course of his letter, he lectures me on the character of the Swedish language and its antipathy to borrowing foreign words, a matter which seems beside the point. A procedure made all the more ridiculous by the language of his letter, more than a third of which consists of loan words from German, French, and Latin. Thriller genre being a good specimen of good old pure Swedish. Does anyone else want to read?
Oh my goodness.
That is
I
funny.
love that. That is great. So it sounds like this guy's saying, look, I'm sending you back a long list of names that must be Swedishized, because we don't want to have foreign sounding words here in the Swedish version of The Lord of the Rings. Am I getting the right idea here?
Yeah, obviously that's what he said.
Be interesting to see what the Swedish translation of The Lord of the Rings is like now, when you look at the names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my last name was Americanized, and I wish it hadn't been, because Kupferstein is a lot better.
Doesn't that mean like Copper Mountain or something?
Coppersmith.
Coppersmith, yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be from German though, originally.
Yes, but German Jews went by their occupation. So, and Solomon Kupferstein came from, I don't know where. Brian's still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I did find a Kupferstein street at Wittenberg. I think I sent you that picture.
Yeah.
Okay, who's the next reader? Kupferstein?
I suppose.
Go for it.
I find this procedure puzzling because the litter and the list seem totally pointless unless my opinion and criticism is invited. But nothing like uninvited criticism. But if this is its object, then surely the timing is both unpractical and impolite. Presented together with a pistol, we are going to start the composition now. Neither is my convenience consulted. The communication comes out of the blue in the second most busy academic week of the year. I have to sit up far into the night even to survey the list. Conceding the legitimacy and necessity of translation, which I do not accept in a limited degree, the translation does not seem to me to exhibit much skill and contains a fair number of positive errors. For example, Ford of Brunnen is Bjornvad, and Arket is Game
Gamlaby.
Gamlaby, a mere guess, I suppose, from Archaic. Mountains of Loon, Ered Luin equals Manbergen. Glad, which is a good German name. Gladden Falls, in spite of description in letter 62, is Lerusha Slata. I'm married to a Swede, and I can't figure this out, and so on. Even if excusable, in view of the difficulty of the material, I think it regrettable, and they could have been avoided by earlier consultation. It seems to me fairly evident that Dr. O has stumbled along dealing with things as they came up to him without much care for future coordination, and that he has not read the appendices at all, or I surmise the nomenclature of the latter volumes, in which he would have found many answers.
Okay, let's stop there so that Hawk can have a turn to read. Okay, so let's discuss this interesting section here. What are your all thoughts on that? I can't. I'm not looking at the screen. Sorry. Who's got their hand up?
Anthony raised his
Go ahead,
hand.
Anthony. If nobody's speaking.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that Tolkien seems to have had a lot of difficulty with translations and translators in his lifetime. That seems to be a common theme in some of his letters. And he was kind of hard to please, especially when it came to matters of nomenclature and language, and which is, natural, of course, being that he was a philologist. So that's kind of what I got from this reading this paragraph.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, he was upset because, the guy didn't coordinate with him.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem to be. It's not like sending this to him and then saying, giving him a month or two to get back to him. It's kind of like, I need your attention immediately on this because I have nine pages of names that need to change or whatever. So I've actually looked a little bit at this. I think I understand his little note here. So because he understands a little bit, right? And so he's objecting to the reason why some of this has to be changed. Because, for example, Ford of Bruinen, this translator is not aware of the Elvish meaning of Bruinen. And so he's finding a word that sounds like it in Swedish, Bjorn, which means bear. And so Avad would be Ford. So he's changing it to Bear Ford, but the meaning of Bruinen is brown, I think.
Yes, but Bruins is the California grizzly.
Right, from Latin.
Yes.
You're right. Yes, but that's what I'm pointing out is that this guy's guessing. He's saying, well, really, actually the river Bruinen is translated as loud water, or I'm looking on Parf Ed Helen, which is an Elvish dictionary online, and it's a Noldoran word from two parts, brui, which means loud, and nen, which means water. So this guy's simply looking at it and saying, oh, well, really that's, we should put it into a Swedish version of the bear, the Ford of the Bear, but it's a wrong connection. And then Archet equals Gamlaby. So a Gamla is, I know in Norwegian anyway, Gamla is, it means old.
Mm-hmm.
And B or by would be village. So he thinks Archet, which is this little village near Bree in the woods, he's trying to make this into a Swedish version by calling it Old Town or Old Village. But Archet, it doesn't necessarily mean that, And then Mountains of Loon, Eredluin, which would be, of course, from Elvish. In Mohnbergen, I don't know about that. Gladdenfields, Lusa Schlettner, I don't know. But he knows enough that he's like, well, this guy is actually, some of these changes don't even make sense. So
The thing is, what's his name? Omarx doesn't understand the Elvish or, the local vernacular, which is what Tolkien used, which is quite remarkable because he developed his own language. But the guy clearly wasn't that familiar with Tolkien's works. He was just a translator.
yeah, I of course, to be fair to him, what we don't know is how much, we have like Elvish dictionaries and appendices that we can look to. Did this guy have any ability to understand what these Elvish words meant? At the same time, yeah, it is a bit.
It was an early draft, right? This wasn't even a finished piece, so
Yeah,
none of
but
those
the
resources
thing
for
is,
context.
Tolkien's complaint is the guy didn't coordinate with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not an early. Well, so the English copy of The Lord of the Rings has been published, and here is the Swedish translator saying, "I object to these names, and we need to change these."
I mean, but there wasn't the resource of the Silmarillion completed and all that
Right.
to help with all
Absolutely,
that.
yes. This is after the very first edition, first printing, I think, of
Yeah.
The Lord of the Rings, and so everybody was quickly saying, "Yeah, this is popular. We want to translate it already into foreign languages." I mean, the Dutch one's already done, right? So, okay, all right. Well, Gary Hawk was just, I think, saying that he doesn't mind just passing on reading this. So,
Okay.
should we go back to Gary?
Okay. Yeah, I got a short one. I do hope that it can be arranged if and when any further translations are negotiated, that I should be consulted at an early stage without frightening a shy bird off the eggs. After all, I charge nothing and can save a translator a good deal of time and puzzling. And if consulted at an early stage, my remarks will appear far less in the light of peevish criticisms. Well, basically the same thing I said before, coordinate with me.
Carry on.
Okay, I see now that the lack of an index of names is a serious handicap in dealing with these matters. If I had an index of names, even one with only reference to volume and chapter, not page, it would be a comparatively easy matter to indicate at once all names suitable for translation, as being themselves, according to the fiction, translated into English. And to add a few notes on points where I now know translators are likely to trip. This hand list would be of great use to me in future corrections and in composing an index, which I think should replace some of the present appendices. Also in dealing with this Silmarillion, into which some of the Lord of the LR
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings has to be written backwards to make the two coherent. Do you think you can do anything about this? So that's interesting.
Yeah. So already there's there's the realization that in order to be of use and help, there needs to be some an index or some kind of helpful tools already at this stage. And of course, if the first English edition had been printed, you'd have these appendices, but those appendices are more background information. They're not meant to be a guide for translators.
And this is all a consequence of him trying for a decade to get them to include the Silmarillion first, to explain all the names, because the Silmarillion does all of that, so that then that wouldn't be a problem. And then when they said, no, we're not going to do that, bolting on the appendices, etc., as he talks about writing the Lord of the Rings backwards, this is all a consequence of them not letting him include the Silmarillion. Of course, if they had, he would have never finished.
Well, and there's another thought.
Would have never finished.
Yes, no, I agree. But then there's another thought, which is really that the reason why it couldn't be included at the beginning was because of the war. Because after the war, there was such a shortage of paper. And this is really the reason why Allen and Unwin were very risk averse. They're like, this is expensive. And so if there had not been, if the war had not impacted Britain to the extent it did, paper would not have been so expensive and would have been easier to print larger, kinds of, or more. You could make an argument for saying, hey, it's not as much of a risk for you as a publishing company. And then maybe he would have printed more, or the Silmarillion would have gotten out earlier. But I feel in my bones that you're right, that even if he had been given the green light by Allen and Unwin, would he have been able to put something together? Or being a teacher, if he had a deadline, maybe he would have.
It's possible. It is possible that's what he needed to kick him in the rear.
Yep.
Wasn't he famous for, or infamous for, putting stuff off, though? Not finishing something.
Yeah, he was also infamous as a perfectionist. Like, he would start a story, then if he was dissatisfied with it, he would erase it and start over.
Yeah. Chris Cooperstein, any comments that you wanted to share about this this letter since we finished it? Except for the fact that we all need to get more fluent in Swedish.
Yeah, don't you know?
Yeah, sure. You betcha.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, betcha. Yeah.
Well, did that index of names appear? I think it did.
Yes,
in the version that I had.
Well, I've got the 50th anniversary edition, and I mean, there's a lot of appendices in there, and there is commentary on Elvish and Dwarvish languages, Elvish languages especially, Noldor. And I don't remember a list, but it's been a long time since I looked at that particular section of the book.
I think it may have not been a specific list of names, if I recall. I think it may have been, here's how to pronounce a bunch of these words.
Okay, anything else? Because what I'd like to do with the last 10 minutes, if this is okay with everybody, is to kind of look at what Anthony shared and kind of make a plan for this fall about Tolkien influences upon Tolkien. So last comments on letter 204. Anybody have anything else to say?
Nope.
Okay. So orcs are not communists, and when translating names, remember that place names often have a deep connection to the context in which they come, the cultural context, and therefore cannot just be easily translated over to another language. Which I find interesting when you think about Japanese anime, and we watched with my girls. They finally got to see My Neighbor Totoro, and so
Totoro.
Yeah, it's a Studio Ghibli. It's a very good kids.
Do you know what Totoro?
It's a troll, right? Isn't it a troll?
It also means stupid.
Really?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I think one of my problems is, I lived on Okinawa, and I'm not in mainland Japan, so sometimes I use the Okinawan language and I don't even know, but which is completely, I mean, as far as the words themselves are different than the Japanese language, although the syntax is the same, but some things are similar, but they're not.
Because I
So,
know
but
mainstream
anyway,
Japanese
Totoro, yeah.
baka is
Hawk?
stupid.
What were we saying?
I said in mainstream Japanese, baka means stupid.
That's true. It's crazy. Waka.
Crazy, stupid, stupid, crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this more like Totoro might be more like half-wit?
Yeah, I think you're probably right there.
I wonder is so because
Chris,
I
you
thought it was
spent
a
time in
translation.
Japan.
Okay, I thought it was a translation of troll. That's really interesting. We'll have to maybe come back to that another time. But it does show too that language, there's certain things you can translate over easily, and then there's some things that you can't. So I mean, that's an interesting comment, but I think we'll have to put that off till next meeting maybe. Yeah, so can we talk a little bit about the fact that what we've been doing for quite a few months is looking at as another thing along with the Letters of Tolkien that gives us kind of a little bit more connection to the writer and who he was and his community. And a writer is always connected to those who came before him or her, those who are the peers that live approximately the same time, and they might influence each other. And then also those who we can see they have influenced. And so we started actually, we worked our way backwards, starting with what fantasy writers has Tolkien directly or indirectly influenced, and that's almost all of them, really. Maybe less so now, but up until probably
Spite of him, which means they're
Exactly.
still influenced because they're
they
overtly-
absolutely yes.
Like, I will not do anything Tolkien did. I will write it this way, and who knows what they might have done differently if they hadn't been.
Exactly.
Yes,
Spite
exactly.
mode.
So, and then of course just a huge debt, of course, within fantasy literature, even as a genre. There was not quite as much of a sharp delineation back in like the 50s or whatever. So you have this kind of this legacy. We've dealt with that. We talked about his peers, those who lived about the similar time period, and of course focusing really mostly on the Inklings, obviously, and then now wanting to turn our attention to his influences. And I want to just read off, or have Anthony actually read off some of the things you've got there, and then Hawk, you have a book. Maybe after Anthony reads his, you could just share a few things. If there's anything in that book you may not have it handy, that's totally fine. But just off the top of your head, maybe a few of those, if Anthony's list doesn't include them. And then after both of you share, it'd be nice if we could just at least choose what we're going to do next month. So Anthony, would you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of listed Tolkien's literary influences from sort of ancient times to up until late 19th century. So here it goes. So Beowulf, the Gawain poet, whoever wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Arthurian legend, the Norse Eddas and sagas, Germanic legend such as the Nibelungenlied, which inspired Wagner, his Ring Cycle, the Mabinogion, which is a collection of Welsh literature or tales, the Kalevala, which is a Finnish epic, which kind of inspired the Tale of Turin Turambar, or the Kullervo story did. Geoffrey Chaucer, who of course is a big name among the medievals. William Morris, who was he was kind of part of the arts and crafts movement in Britain, and he also translated, I think, the Volsunga saga and other classic Scandinavian works. And then a couple of 19th century fantasy authors like E.R.r. Edison.
That'd be the Worm Ouroboros, is it, or the World's End?
Yeah. William Morris actually wrote The Well at World's End.
Right.
E.R.r. Edison wrote the Ouroboros cycle, or whatever it's called.
Right.
And then there's H. Rider Haggard, who wrote a novel called She, which I think inspired Tolkien. And then Lord Dunsany, who I think wrote some children's folk tales that inspired Tolkien. And then finally George MacDonald.
Okay.
So that's kind of my list.
Thanks, Anthony. And Hawk, was there anybody that you wanted to add to that list? I was thinking of the book that you've shown me before, and I know Lord Dunsany was definitely one of those influences. And so, if anybody in the group thinks of other ones, send those out by email if you can. Hawk, do you have any leanings on if you want to? Do you want to start way back? Do you want to kind of continue with this kind of going backwards in time? Looking at more recent influences like.
Yeah, Homeric epics.
So, right. Yeah, Wayback Machine. I like that. How would everybody feel then about starting? Like, we can all do a little research, right? But without just naming one, but just saying, let's start with ancient sources. Anything before the year 300 AD, or CE. Well, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Anything BC, we'll start there. And then we can start. I wonder if it would be helpful to create a Google document where we can just be listing things that as people think of it. So if that's okay, we could try that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can list a few things.
That would be
Okay.
good.
Anthony, did you want to kind of get that started, or did you want me to do that?
Oh, Google, like a Google Doc or some kind?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can do it.
Yeah. If you could just then share that with others, and we can kind of add to it. But I like the idea of starting with, ancient, so BC, kind of, or before Common Era.
From a hypothetical, because we could hypothesize forever, considering his classic training, but where he specifically mentions them and
Yes.
the pieces that struck him or whatever, just that he specifically mentions.
Right.
I think that's
Absolutely.
what we have to limit it to. Otherwise, it'll go too far afield.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. Because he read widely. So there's ones that are more speculation. So let's keep it to ones that he acknowledges their influence upon him, or he quotes from. I think those would be two. Either of those would be fine.
Exactly.
Exactly. And then we can kind of break it down by era. So then we can kind of have the kind of from the time, so early Common Era, or whatever you want to call it, just up to, like, say, the year 500, which maybe would, or maybe a little bit later than that, we could include if we go up to, like,
We could start with 500-year increments and
yeah,
drill
because
Um,
down.
I think the Kalevala actually might predate Beowulf, but I'm not sure. But they're both kind of at the same time period, right?
I'm not sure on that. That'll be good to know.
Yeah.
Well, it was a collection of folk tales told orally that was published actually in the 19th century by Elias Lönnrot in Finland.
See,
But,
that's something fast.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Vanamoinen, the wizard. I it's pretty hard to put a date on when these things emerged, but I'm going to say it's in the first 1,000 years. This seems pre-medieval. We know, for example, Beowulf is. It's not pre-medieval, but it's early medieval. So yeah. Okay, we could do that. We could do ancient, early medieval, kind of late medieval, and then kind of Renaissance time period. I mean, he doesn't draw from a lot of, people during that time, but maybe somebody. So yeah, let's just structure it, break it down by 500-year increments. Anthony, the last 500 years, we might need to break it down again a little
as we get closer, break into
By century?
smaller increments. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
by.
I'll create like a Google spreadsheet or something, and then we can
Thank you.
modify it as we go
Yeah,
along.
yeah, we can kind of add underneath each, era. We can add some things that we might find. So thank you, Anthony, for doing that. Okay, well, it is just past 3. So our fearless founder, any last words you want to share?
Everybody.